Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders, a podcast where people connected to autism inspire change and build community. Together with the Global Autism Project, I'm your host, Rachel Harmon, a professional with over a decade of experience in the field of autism services, outreach, and advocacy. This episode is part 2 of my conversation with Brian Middleton, which was originally released on October 22nd, 2020. Brian Middleton is an autistic self-advocate, a board-certified behavior analyst, and the creator of The Bearded Behaviorist. In this episode, we talk about receiving an autism diagnosis as an adult, why Brian thinks autism can be seen as both a disorder and a neurotype, the disagreement between the neurodiversity movement and the field of ABA, why stimming and self-regulation are important, the need for trauma-informed care and behavior analysis, and striving for a more compassionate approach to supporting autistic individuals. In this episode, discover what's possible when you acknowledge your mistakes. And now, I present you Brian Middleton. Okay, Brian, let's go backwards a little bit. I want to talk about your discovery of your diagnosis, because I know that happened later in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Could you elaborate more on that?
So my first special education job was at Pineview Middle School in St. George, Utah. And I had a couple of students who were autistic. And my education hadn't really prepared me for being able to support autism. Like there's a lot of stuff that was said, but when I encountered these kids, I was like, I'm talking to my younger me. That's weird.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I filled an emergency position as a special ed teacher at Pineview Middle School. A special ed teacher had gotten fed up, verbally fused, cognitively fused, and walked out. And they had been having a long-term substitute for 2 months before I got hired onto the job. And so I came in and filled that role. And it was definitely like being thrown in the deep end, and it was a lot of fun. And it was really hard too. But that gave me some good experience. And then my next job was at Diamond Valley Elementary School in Washington County. So it wasn't in St. George. It was still a bit of a drive. It was actually a longer drive than going to St. George from Cedar City. But I was a special ed teacher for an elementary school, and my emphasis was more secondary. But I was like, sure, I'll give it a try. Like, I've got some exposure to early childhood education, and again, it was like, this is younger me. All these kids, like, yeah, they're their own people and they're unique. But all these things that they're dealing with and experiencing are very similar to what I dealt with and experienced.
What were some of those things that you were seeing?
The stimming, you talk about stimming, but then you see it and you're like, oh, that's stimming. For me as a kid, my stims were rubbing things, soft things. This one's kind of gross, picking my nose, and plucking, pulling on things. I like to pull on my ear, joint compression,
Mm-hmm.
kind of grabbing, that sort of stuff. Those were a lot of my big stims. I went through a phase where hawking and spitting was a stim. I'm very glad I'm out of that phase. No. Some of them were kind of gross. My biggest stim that I still have now is I bite my nails. And I still do the rubbing and stroking. You can't see it, but I've been, rubbing my arm, that sort of stuff. When a little kid walks up to me and they see my big fuzzy arms, they start rubbing it. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I don't think it's weird at all. I think it's great. I didn't really have any of the flapping or anything like that, although I did walk on my toes quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And a stim that I'm trying to transfer, and I actually need to address it right now. Ow. Is when I'm sitting in a chair, I tend to push my feet into the ground. I don't tend to relax unless it's a relaxing chair.
Mm.
And that one's kind of a problem because that's causing some joint issues for me now in my older age. But I'm trying to figure out how to transfer it to something else, because stimming isn't a problem unless it causes harm. And that's something that I really try to emphasize. In fact, a story that I shared a little bit ago, but I still love it. I call this client REM now because I was kind of last minute schedule put on sitting with him during lunch. And I said something, he's non-vocal, and I said something that made me think of REM, the band. And so I was like, hey man, let's listen to REM. So I pull it up on my phone and we listen to REM for an hour and we stim together. And, I gave him joint compressions and he would do his flapping thing and I would do it with him and we connect. And like at the end of it, it was just so relaxing and enjoyable because like a couple of times he indicated he didn't like the song, so I skip it, that sort of thing. But it was about connecting and not worrying about a lot of things that other people worry about. Like a lot of people are really wanting to suppress stimming. I think that's just silly.
Yeah. And it can cause harm.
Yeah. Traumatizing.
Yeah.
So, but back to it. I'm bringing it back in. Sorry, reel it in here.
So you saw these kids who you were seeing yourself in.
And so I started researching and I started with nonverbal learning disorder to try to understand that. And then I started looking into autism. And as a part of being a special ed teacher in the United States, there's something called Child Find, which is the drive, the requirement to identify children with special needs and provide them with support. And so a big part of my job is identification, which is not the same as diagnosis, even though it basically is. Let's be totally honest. It basically is the process. But we take data, we'd see how it's affecting their academics and their social life and that sort of thing. And then we'd do testing. Some of them are questionnaires, some of them are cognitive and academic testing, those sorts of things. And based off of certain patterns, kids would be identified in different ways. And so I'm experienced with administering a lot of those different things. And I happened to find out that with one of the testing packets that were ordered that they included adult tests, and the school district just threw those away. And so I asked if I could take one. And I tested myself and I scored in the autism spectrum disorder range with it. And so I started collecting more data. I went and I got a hold of my original IEP, which my mother had saved. I tried reaching out to the school, but they had actually stopped saving the records. But luckily my mom had it. And I started gathering all this information together. And I went to my general practitioner doctor, my family doctor, and I said, I think I'm autistic. And then I proceeded to overwhelm him with all the data I collected. and he's like, okay. and he just entered it in. And I'm like, wait, you're not going to have me do any tests? And he's like, you did everything. I don't need to do anything.
How old were you at this point?
26.
Okay.
26 or 27. Somewhere in that range. I'm 35 now. So it's been 36 in November.
And what was that like for you to find out that you had autism at that point in your life?
It was a bit of a relief because it was like, oh, I'm not crazy. Flip side of that was, oh, I am crazy. But I'm not crazy, but I am crazy. But not long after that, I discovered the book Neurotypes, which introduced me to the concept of neurodiversity. And that's where, I don't know if anybody else has formed this idea, but that's where I've come up with the theory of disorder versus neurotype and how they're both right. Because a lot of times people are like, well, no, it's one or the other. And I'm like, I'm always the one that's like, why are you arguing nature versus nurture when it's obviously both? I find these arguments to be a little bit silly because people create, they tell this story to themselves and they go into camps and they go to war with each other. And I'm just like, but what if it's a little bit of each?
Yeah.
And so my theory is that autism is a neurotype, just like any other neurotype that occurs. It's the way the brain's structured. But then there's disordered components of a neurotype. Just like anybody can experience clinical depression or depression disorder. Like we all experience the feeling of being depressed, but the disorder is where certain characteristics come up. And the way DSM-5, if I remember correctly, talks about disorders is it's basically some sort of discomfort or problem that's created in the individual's life due to the effects of this disorder. And I'm convinced that there are tons of people who are autistic as a neurotype, but due to the way that life happened and the great things that have happened to them, and some of the bad things too, and maybe they learned a little bit this way and that way, that sort of thing, that they're very adaptive. And they've got the skills that they need, and they're successful. Does that mean that they might have disorder? They don't have any disorder components? Not necessarily. Like, show me a normal person and I'll tell you haven't looked very deep. Everybody's got their struggles. That's a part of being human.
Yeah.
But it's this, we have to accept the pain and struggle that we have. That's where ACT comes in. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we need to perpetuate it. We can say we can do different and we can do better. And I'm a big proponent of the do better movement. I'm a huge proponent of trauma-informed care. I am also cautious. I caution people about trauma-informed care, not because that's a bad idea, but because sometimes people over-pathologize. So again, we're going back to extremes here. It's all about the balance. And in fact, that reminds me, I had an RBT. This is
A registered behavior technician.
yeah, registered behavior technician. This is just before I passed the board certified behavior analyst exam, and he was asking me about why are we doing things different with this client compared to all these other clients. And it's one of those little bing light came on, and I started making connections, and I'm talking about this is about balance. Like, some people struggle with rigidity and other people struggle with structure. And, a lot of people say autistics, they need structure in order for them to, and I'm like, not necessarily. Like, you don't have to have rigid structure. It's about being balanced in this. And so the reason why different kids receive different supports and why different kids are taught different ways is because maybe one person is imbalanced in this way, and we need to help them bring back to center and to be balanced. So that way they can access the reinforcement that they want without having to resort to behaviors that harm themselves and others. And this kid over here is imbalanced in another way. And so we need to bring them back to balance. And at the end of the day, behavior analysis is education. It's the science of learning. And the science of learning still needs to learn. Like, we're not done. Like, the science is not settled. And any behavior analyst out there who says it, I'm like, you are talking about a religion, not a science. Like,
Right.
we have to continuously strive to improve, because if we don't, then we defeat the purpose.
Yeah. And by the way, congratulations. I know you just passed your exam.
Thank you.
And that's a huge accomplishment. I know all the hard work that it takes to get there. So
That's a hard test.
So, as you mentioned earlier, there are some autistic people who are part of the neurodiversity movement who are against applied behavior analysis. I think it's harmful in forcing people to behave like neurotypicals. What do you say in response to that?
If there's behavior analysts who are trying to get autistic individuals to behave like neurotypicals, they're wrong. And those individuals in the autism community who have that concern are very much right in having that concern. And we need to listen to them. Now, the flip side to that is there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of rage. And when you allow anger and rage to fuse with you, it narrows your view and it prevents you from being able to see the whole picture. And I'm speaking from experience here. I'm not speaking hypothetically. And my appeal to those people is to please stop judging all of a science because of the bad behavior of some people within the science. That isn't me saying not all ABA, because I know a lot of people get angry when that term comes out. And my response is all ABA is responsible, because until it is 100% stopped, we are all responsible for those behaviors and attitudes that those behavior analysts do. And the Behavior Analysis Certification Board needs to take a firm stance on this.
Yeah.
And needs to say that forced compliance, one, is not a evidence-based practice. There's no evidence to show that forced compliance does anything other than act as a punisher and turn the individuals who utilize forced compliance into agents of punishment, which our research shows that when you have punishers and agents of punishment, you have unintended consequences of punishment. And those unintended consequences of punishment can loosely be rolled into the idea of trauma. Neural pathways form. There's neurological damage that's done. There's different responses that occur. Behavior analysis is a science of description. We describe what we see, and so we don't try to explain. But at the same time, just because we're a science of description doesn't mean that we can't learn the sciences of explanation. And neuropsychology, evolutionary psychology, endocrinology, all these other things, they all apply because the act of reinforcement is describing what happens when a neural pathway forms. It describes what happens when dopamine or epinephrine, norepinephrine is released. It describes what happens when serotonin is released in the brain and the body. And the reason I bring up evolutionary psychology is because the number one failure of behavior analysts when they try to teach or train or program, whatever word you want to use, a autistic individual to behave like a neurotypical individual, what they're really trying to do is they're trying to alter the person's innate attributes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're a mix, like going back to nature versus nurture, we're a mix of nature and nurture. And so there's a lot of behaviors that autistics or autism spectrum disorder individuals experience that are a combination of their nature, what they're innately born with, and the consequences that have occurred. But stimming is one of those ones where it is a ontogenic, and I think I'm using that right, an ontogenic property. It's something that's innate, and every human stims. Just because autistics stim more doesn't mean other humans don't. My favorite example of automatic negative reinforcement, which is a stim.
Can you explain?
Yes. Yeah. So there's 4 functions of behavior: access, attention, escape, avoidance, which is kind of the same. You can escape or try to avoid something if you know what's coming up. And then automatic or sensory. I don't like using the term sensory because all stimulus is sensory. So I prefer automatic as the term. So automatic reinforcement a lot of times is referred to as you do it because it feels good. So cases of automatic reinforcement, you eat something because it's sweet. It's automatically reinforcing you. Sex is automatically reinforcing. Breathing is automatically reinforcing. You want to breathe. It feels good to breathe. It feels good to swallow. Well, automatic negative reinforcement, positive means something's being added. Not as in positive perception, but like positive as in I add something plus. Well, negative is something is being removed, so something's being taken away. So automatic negative reinforcement is alleviation of internal pressure. A great example that I just thought of now, and I'm going to start using it moving forward, is when you're holding your breath and you need to breathe. And you take that big breath when you come out of the water, or after you go through that tunnel, if you played that holding your breath through the tunnel game as a kid, it's taking away, it's alleviating the pressure. It can also be a little positive too, because you're adding something to it, but it's also alleviation, so it's positive and negative. But my favorite example of negative reinforcement that's only negative is that huff of frustration. You feel pressure building inside your body. You feel frustration. And it has to do with our verbal behavior, but that huff alleviates it. Those people who feel like they just always have to say something, and they say it even when nobody's around, even when they don't think anybody's observing them. That's an automatic negative because it's alleviating some sort of internal pressure. And that's a big deal. And a lot of stimming is that. When I'm feeling a lot of internal pressure, and it doesn't have to be bad pressure. I chew my nails real lot, like a ton. And if I don't plan ahead and have some gum, it's going to be bad. And even then, sometimes gum isn't quite enough because there's a sensory on the end of my finger and in my mouth.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. A really intense movie that I'm just into and I'm 100% there. And I don't even notice that I'm going at my fingernails. It doesn't have to be a bad pressure, but it's still a pressure. And I think we need to as a science, and not just as a science, but all human services that work with individuals who are autistic, we need to understand this idea that unless the stimming is causing physical harm to the individual or to others, and I mean real physical harm, that it really shouldn't be a target for trying to reduce or get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you a real example of that. I knew a client who would go like this with his hand. He'd put his fingers together and make them all pointy, and he would tap his chin over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And it actually resulted in him getting some really bad infections because he kept on. It would hurt him. It would cause him to bleed, and he got some really, really awful infections. So we had to figure out some other ways of helping to alleviate that pressure. Flip side of that, though, is that he was experiencing a lot of pressure because of environment. And interestingly, this individual, his parents were going through a divorce at the time. And once the divorce had been finalized and there was some separation, stimming reduced. Didn't stop, but it reduced to the point where he wasn't hurting himself. We continued working on acceptance and that sort of thing, and it reduced further, like acceptance of others to him, of including him, and it reduced further. And I don't know if that has stopped because I haven't seen him in a while, and I don't know what his progress is. But this is over a course of 3 years that I worked with him.
Yeah.
And so I got to observe the change. And part of the change that I observed was when I was able to apply behavior analytic principles. But the reason why I was such a great special ed teacher, because I was told even before I learned behavior analysis that I'd work miracles. Although I got better at it afterwards, I turned into a real miracle worker because I could pull it out on command, which was fun. But the reason that I was able to be so successful was because my core foundational value was treat them like a person.
Yeah.
And that included going up to bat and pushing back against every single parent, adult, teacher who held them to impossible standards. Because, and this is an important thing, a lot of times when a kid is identified with some sort of label, peers can get away with the same behavior. A kid shouts out in class, teacher ignores it. My student shouts out in class, they're storming down the hall, telling me all about it. And it took a lot of work to get to that point. But before I left Canyon View Middle School, I had almost all the teachers on board with me. And we had almost 100% inclusion of our mild, moderate kids. I didn't work with the severe population as much, but they were definitely, it was generalizing. That there were some positive benefits that were coming from that. But the reason I left was because there were a couple holdouts who wouldn't, a couple teachers, and the administration. They weren't. And I was getting to a point where I was going back into depression, and I was having such a hard time, and I couldn't continue with that. So I decided that the best thing to do for me was to change my environment, because I need to get out of a situation where I was seeing myself spiraling. And I worry about those kids a lot, and I hope things, especially with COVID.
Hey, Rachel here. I'd like to thank one of our listeners, Izzy0826, for reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts. They said, "Thank you for having conversations that will help people grow and think beyond stigmas and misinformation. Thank you for the kind words. 5-star reviews like yours help us to continue spreading autism awareness and acceptance around the world. If, like Izzy, you're finding value in Autism Knows No Borders, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts." And now, back to the conversation. About not programming to reduce stimming, I think there is a movement in reformed ABA, it might be called, to really look at the autistic person's values and respect that they might just be doing something because it is helping them, it's helping their body self-regulate. And even when it comes to what's so-called like tantrum or meltdown behavior or all of these challenging behaviors that are really just a form of communication, And I totally get what you're saying about the BACB taking a stance. And I'm even wondering if maybe they should say something to address and acknowledge all of the people who have had ABA, like the bad ABA, and who are now traumatized, and make some kind of like apology or something. I don't know if it's the BACB's responsibility, but I feel like there just needs to be some kind of public statement. And I wonder if that would help bridge the gap between the angry autistic people and the people who are actually trying to do good with ABA.
Yeah. So the term you're looking for is trauma-informed behavior analysis, TIBA.
Okay, thank you.
That's the behavior analysis that you're talking about, the reformed. The BACB is an organization, and they will respond the way that organizations respond. And I'm going to kind of leave it at that because I don't want to stick my foot in my mouth.
Okay, I understand.
But what really needs to happen is all behavior analysts need to be responsible. We all need to say that while this is happening, we are responsible and we take ownership of it, even if my actions aren't doing that. And have I made mistakes? Yes. Yes, I have. In fact, one of the mistakes that really got me thinking was when I was a special ed teacher, before I even started behavior analysis, and I was working with a student, and I pushed him really hard, and he broke down into tears, and it hit me what I had just done. And I burst into tears and apologized to him over and over again. I said, I am so sorry. I screwed up. And I'm still in contact with that family. And hopefully he still likes me, because not that a kid liking me is the important thing, because I want them to be successful. But I'm still in contact with them, and the last few interactions I had were always positive, and he's actually reached out to me a few times, and that's that sort of thing. But like, we all make mistakes, and we all do things that are wrong. Parents, I know you get tired, you get exhausted. It's hard. This is difficult. I wouldn't wish this sort of challenge on anybody. And I've lived it. I've lived it from both ends. From the teacher therapist point of view and from the student, and not the parent yet, but I'm excited to be a parent. I know it's going to be challenging, and it's okay that you screw up, but own it. Take full responsibility for yourself and treat that person the way you would want to be treated if someone screwed up with you. Apologize. Try to do better. Look for ways to connect with them, because nothing is more punishing to a relationship than refusal to admit that you made a mistake. And I use punishing both in the common term and the behavior analysis term, because punishment means to reduce the likelihood of future behaviors. That's literally all it means. It's like a stimulus following something that its future behaviors are less likely to happen. Well, relationships are a series of behaviors. And if we don't cultivate and reinforce our relationships, then we punish them, and the relationship stops. And this applies for everybody. This applies for spousal relationships, friendships, family. If the relationship is punishing, the person will stop participating in it. And I think that's only right.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can own our mistakes and our errors, and we can say, I screwed up and I need to do better. And I'm bringing that to you and saying, I am going to try to do better. Then we can change things and alter things. And the same thing goes for the entire field. The entire field of behavior analysis. I am an autistic BCBA, and I am responsible for what happened to other autistics that caused trauma. I am responsible, and I am going to stand against it. And we have to do it together. Otherwise, nothing's going to change.
Yeah. Well, Brian, I think we can keep talking for hours on these topics, but we are going to have to wrap up here. And I'd like to close with one last question. What advice would you give to other professionals? Because you have this really interesting perspective. As you said, you're an autistic BCBA. You're like a unicorn in a way.
Oh, there's a lot of us out there. There are a lot of us out there. I'm just really loud.
But you're such a great asset to the field and to the autistic community, because you stand in that place of being able to gain trust from both sides, because you are on both sides. And I hate to say it in that way that there are sides, but you live and breathe both things that we're talking about here.
I think I can frame it towards everyone, including professionals. Do unto others as they would have done unto them. The golden rule is do unto others as you would have done unto you, right?
Okay.
But the reality is that we're a broad, diverse, amazingly beautiful species with a lot of variation. And if we do unto others as they would have done unto them, then that is truly understanding. And to go with that, we need to reinforce the change that we want to see in the world. And that starts with us. That's what we need to do. We need to take action because behavior is action. Behavior isn't something that, like, it's a muscular, glandular, or neuroelectric activity, right? Where it's something that we do. Well, behavior analysis applies to everybody, including ourselves. So we apply it to ourselves. And that part of that application is doing to others as they would have done unto them and reinforcing the change we want to see in the world. And I want to see a world where suffering is optional. I want to see a world where connectivity is the default. I want to see a world where instead of assuming the worst happens, and we can feel it and experience it and worry about it, but we try to go for our best. We need to pivot towards, to use an ACT term, connectivity. Because suffering, the pain is default. Pain is always going to happen. There's no way to escape it. Living is painful. When we go to sleep at night, our body is trying to deal with the inflammation that comes from the gravity pushing down on us and us stepping on things, and our muscles and joints going out of joint as we walk along, that sort of thing, or move along however we move. That's our body's way of trying to address it. But just because that's the default doesn't mean that it has to be everything. Meaning is made by us. We make the difference through our actions.
Mm-hmm.
There was a point where I was kind of going into nihilism before I kind of discovered some of these ideas, where it's like, life is meaningless. What's the point? Now I go, life is meaningless except when I make it meaningful. Make it meaningful. Make every day count. There's a TED Talk. The speaker, his first name is Jocko. I always forget his last name. He's a former Special Forces. I think he was a SEAL. He talks about radical or total self-responsibilities, total self-accountability. And his story is amazing. I'm not going to paraphrase the story. Just watch the TED Talk. Jocko, Jacko. I think that's how you spell it anyways.
I think I've seen him on Joe Rogan.
Yeah, he's been on Joe Rogan several times, and he's an amazing dude. And he talks about radical self responsibility and ownership. We have to own ourselves. And I could say, well, I did this, and that because this person did this, and that. And you know what? The reality is that's probably true. But I own me. So I own my mistakes. I own the things that I've said in anger and frustration. And I own the things that I've done right. And when I own 100% of me, and I never have to worry about the other person owning them because I own me, period. I'm a king. I'm an emperor, right? I'm a sovereign of my own nation. I'm the sovereign of Brian. And I can choose to be so sovereign that when somebody else, when they're in anger or frustration, when they lash out against me, instead of me lashing back, I can say, I'm sorry that you're in pain.
Mm-hmm. And in practice, you might be surprised because once you do take that ownership, the other person realizes that they can take ownership too. And it becomes a back and forth, just connection, like you're saying, and people can open up and be vulnerable and just stop making the other person wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, thank you for your time. I really admire your outlook on life.
Thank you.
And I think you're doing a great service to the field with your Bearded Behaviorist platform. How can people learn more about you?
They can check me out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and minds.com. Because if I'm going to post on one, I usually post on all of them. It's just a few extra seconds. They are welcome to reach out to me through those platforms. I also have a web page that I spend less time on, and I'm trying to work on making it more of a blog. But the response effort is harder for websites. I prefer social media. It's very natural for me. But that's beardedbehaviorist.com. I have 2 podcasts now. The first is Oh Behave, which is focusing on behavior analysis principles for learners. And we have regular podcasts that talk about task list items with trauma-informed behavior analysis incorporated into it. That's important because I feel like that's a weakness in our behavior analysis education, although it's a weakness that's getting stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very happy for me. And then I just started a new podcast called the Act Natural podcast. There's another podcast out there called Act Natural, and it's a bunch of dudes who talk.
Okay. Different act.
It's not act. It's not act at all. Mine's capital ACT, act.
Okay.
So if you go to anchor.fm/Act Natural podcast, you will get the Act Natural podcast, which I have interviews lined up. We haven't recorded as of today, September 26th. So stay tuned for those. And one of the people that we have lined up is Dr. Stephen Hayes has agreed to come on, and we'll be releasing an episode with him sometime in December. He's a busy guy.
Oh, cool. I will look out for that one.
I'm really excited. I had a chance to meet him in person. He's a great guy. He's a wonderful human. And part of the Act Natural podcast is also going to be kind of helping people see neurodiverse populations, not just autism, through a more human frame. So, a little bit like what you're doing, but you're definitely much more focused, and I'm going to be a little bit more scattered because I love being scattered. It's fun. It's enjoyable to scatter.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there you go.
Okay, Brian, thank you so much. Appreciate your time and your willingness to really open up for our listeners. I'm sure so many people can relate to some of the things that you were sharing. So thank you.
I hope I helped.
Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. My conversation with Brian really left me reflecting on my own practice. I must admit that in the early days of my career as a one-on-one therapist, I was trained to implement programs aimed at improving eye contact, reducing hand flapping, and increasing compliance. Although at the time I didn't realize that I could be causing any harm, I'm still definitely not proud of it, and I wholeheartedly take ownership of my actions. As I went on to obtain my BCBA credentials, I learned of the potential trauma that can be caused by targeting goals like these, and like many other clinicians in the field, I turned to a more humanistic approach. For an in-depth commentary on the specific harm related to these goals, please listen to my outro from episode 3 with Eileen Lamb. I've been in the field of ABA for 8 years now, and that's not such a long time. Autistic individuals have been traumatized by questionable ABA for decades. If you're also in the field, I encourage you to honestly examine your own practice. Are you targeting goals that align with your clients' values? Are you honoring their dignity? In Brian's words, are you treating them like they would like to be treated? We know that the principles of learning that stem out of ABA can make miracles in people's lives. In the right environment, children can learn to communicate, dress themselves, and even grow up to become gainfully employed adults. We must fully acknowledge our wrongdoings if we want to gain trust from others and continue changing lives for the better. If you enjoy this podcast and you'd like to support our mission, please take a moment to rate the show and leave a review. You'll be helping us to continue spreading autism awareness and acceptance around the world. Thanks for listening. Take care.